My wife, Erica, and I this summer will have been married 25 years. And so one of the things that's happened over our 25 years is that ever since we've been married, she has either been working on or kind of living in this world of being a sign language interpreter. Erica's a sign language interpreter for the deaf and provides access for the deaf and hard of hearing in our communities to be able to access some services and do things. And so when we were first married, she was in some training programs for that and learning, and she's continued to learn and grow. And if I could just have a brag moment for her for a minute, she's really good at it. She's worked really hard and she's really good at it. And she's gotten to have some unique experiences because of her skill in that. And along the way, I've just gotten to pick up some things. Like I've gotten to learn some things about sign language and about what it's like to be a sign language interpreter. A handful of years ago, she even basically kind of went to law school so that she could get a legal certification to have some of the higher qualifications to interpret in courts and in legal settings. And so she's been in courtrooms and judges' chambers and all those kind of things. And I think it's fascinating. And I've just gotten to listen. And because of that, along the way, I've gotten to learn some things. Like, I've gotten to learn some of how an interpreter might interact with a judge or with a clerk in the court or with lawyers or even with clients, or, how it kind of works and how she gets in, and what it's like to kind of check in and scrub into certain surgery environments in a hospital setting and all those environments that I'm like, that would make me sick to my stomach. And she's like, how can I get in? And so we just have different wirings there. And so for deaf patients and deaf spouses of patients, like all these kind of cool things. And I've just learned some things about how those environments work and what the role and the place of an interpreter is in those environments. I've gotten the experience of knowing some of that, just knowing some of the truth about how those things function. But here's what's also true, is I have no idea and no ability to actually live any of that. Right? I've lived with a sign language interpreter. I've lived with a bilingual wife for 25 years, and I know nothing about how to actually communicate in sign language. I think I have, if I tried really hard, I might be able to get a few letters of the alphabet. I might be able to fingerspell a few letters of the alphabet. The one that I'm kind of good at, and I'm pretty sure is right, is I can say I love you babe. Love you, Kens. They got kids. I'm a veteran. I'm good at that. I got that one down, right? Okay, man, that's about the extent of it, right? So I can't actually do anything with it for real, other than across the room. Just, like the hidden, I love you signs across the room. That's the extent that I've gotten this thing, right? I know a lot, but I can't live much. I've got a knowing experience, but not a living experience. And that's true in all sorts of arenas of life, right? Let's talk about one that's more substantial, even more significant than that. I can be a person, and I'm trying to be a person who is learning and reading and trying to be a listener around the issue of race and race relations and what it's really like to be anti-racist and what racism really looks like and how it impacts our society. I'm trying to be a learner and a listener, and I know more now than I did 5 years ago. But if I'm only a knowledge accumulator, if I've only got an experience of knowing and I don't ever exercise the experience of living it and talking to my friends who are people of color or trying to initiate new friendships with people who don't look like me and be a listener in those environments, if there can be a huge gap right between the experience of knowing truth and living truth. Yes? We just have this huge gap in that in all sorts of arenas of our life. When the invitation really is to merge those together, right? Let knowing and living complement each other and work together and function together. And that's even really the way that Jesus actually designed it, to help it give us some truth so that we could live some truth. The same thing is true inside of marriages or our most significant relationships or dating relationships or relationships with a fiance or even with a parent or a sibling or suite mates on your campus. There's the thing of, how can we live knowing how to do it and actually living it out? How can we shrink the gap between what we know and what we live? And inside of those most important relationships, we need to be honest with one another and say it can get challenging and get hard. Which is why in this month we're just saying, look, it does take this thing called grit. It does take something gritty to get the most out of the relationships, to learn knowing and living together. And grit is very simply this. Again, the definition from Angela Duckworth, not from me, but I think it's a really helpful two-word definition. Grit is really simply this thing. Grit is just this gift of passion and perseverance. It's the merger of those two things. It's definitely passion. It's passion. You got to have some desire and some want to and some drive in this thing, right? And passion isn't always a feeling, but largely we associate with a feeling. but you also got to have some perseverance. Every significant relationship takes some perseverance, some in it for the long haul, some willingness to go through the suffering. Sometimes willingness to even enter into the suffering or return to suffering to get it to move forward, right? In every relationship, including in marriage. So you said, what's it look like to build a little acrostic for this over the next couple of weeks? And we started last week with G, this idea that it really does, we do need God in this thing. We need Jesus-centered relationships. We need to close the gap between marriages in which we say, man, I got a Christian marriage, like we live under a label. That's great, but what's it look like to actually have a marriage and key relationships that are led by, influenced by, guided by the person of Jesus? Like, what's it look like to not just have the label, but to actually be a follower of Jesus in our most significant relationships? What's it look like as a husband and wife to say, look, we're in this thing all the way, but the leader of this thing is actually Jesus. We want him to always be out in front. And so we just talked about how we can do that, how we can actively sacrifice and go in knowing we're going to actively sacrifice and risk spiritual conversations, which aren't always perfect and flawless and don't always feel like these unique and holy moments, but they're necessary. It's just part of grit. And today we're going to just go to the second letter of this thing. We're just going to say, look, we got to have some resolve. There is this element where it's one thing to have God in the equation, but we need some resolve. There are some moments where we're just going to say, look, everything that's required of me, I'm going to invest it into figuring this thing out. I'm going to invest it into this passion and perseverance. I'm going to be a person of resolve so that we can be a couple of resolve, so that we can experience everything that Jesus actually has for us. Now, I know we do this a lot. Like, I think it's helpful to start with good stuff, right? I think it's helpful for us to say, why would I do that, right? It has to somewhere be about more than just for survival, just for the sake of making it. So let's just consider a few good things that are true right now about your life, about your marriage, about your parent-child relationships, about your most significant friendships. Let's just talk about a couple things that are already true. The first one is Philippians chapter 2:13. We've been in this last couple of weeks just kind of using this as a little bit of a frame of reference. And Paul says this, it says, right now it's God, like it's actually God who works in you. Right now, God works in you. Now, we got a choice whether we'll respond to that or partner with it or not. But what's true is that God in his very nature right now is working in you to will and to act and to have desires that are in line with and longings that are in line with his will and his good pleasure and his good purpose. See, what's true is that it's God who's already working in you. And so if you're married, the way you get to play this thing out too and live it out is that God actually works in your spouse. Even when it feels like God's nowhere in the orbit. God's working in your spouse, God's working in your kid, God's working in your parent, God's working in your sibling, right? God is working in you to will and to have these desires and to move and function according to his good purpose. That's good news, right? We're starting with the right kind of momentum. We're starting with, our question is simply, are we gonna yield to that and partner with that? Are we gonna take our most significant relationships and say, yeah, that's true about us, so let's lean into it? And now here's again, once we realize that, we're like, okay, yeah, that's a good thing, and that's great. But what's God doing in that? Like, what kind of work is God doing? Like, what kind of things could we could look for? Well, here's what's true. Like, no matter how bad or good your relationship feels right now, let me tell you what's true, because it's always true about God. Prophet Isaiah said it. God actually spoke it through Prophet Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 43, this is what he said. God said, I'm doing something in your marriage, in your dating relationship, in your family relationship. I'm doing something brand new. Like something you've never thought of before. God is so creative that today he's doing something brand new. Right? And so like here's the thing. This is really encouraging. If your marriage is great and it's wonderful and you want it to keep being great, here's the really good news. God's still doing a brand new thing. If it's great, it's still just getting started, friends. Because God's the same yesterday and today forever. And one of the things that's always true is he's always creative. He's always doing something new, something unheard of. Even now, it's like sprouting up. Even now, like it's got some traction to grow in your life. The soil is good. Like right now, he says it's like, do you perceive it? See, I love it. God's so kind. Like you almost picture this like God with his arm around you. Like look, I'm doing a brand new thing here. And you like, don't think you missed it or don't think you should have heard it. It's so brand new that you've never even heard of it. And I just want to know, are you willing to see it? Are you willing to see it? Do you perceive it? Look, if you've been married 30 years and you're in a moment and you're in a point in time where it is great, I'm just telling you, man, great can get greater. Good can get better. The best can be better than the best because God's got a new thing. He's got unlimited good stuff to give, unlimited creativity to exercise in your life and in your relationships. I don't know what kind of God you want to follow, but come on, somebody, that's the kind of God I want to follow. The God who's got unlimited creativity to do something good in your life. To heal something, rescue something, redeem something, move something. That's the kind of God. Now, maybe though you're here and you're like, it's so bad. I don't even need greater. I just need bearable. Right? Come on. We just need to get by here somehow. Right? I mean, that might be you today. You might just be, it's so bad. I didn't need a chance to take a breath. I don't even know how we're going to make it. Look at the rest of this verse. Here's what God says. Like, where I do my best creative work is I'm going to do it in the wilderness. I'm going to open flowing streams in the desert of your life. In the barren, dry, scalded land of your life and in your marriage, that's where I'm going to unleash the first part of that creativity. I'm going to get you away where you feel like there's nothing. I'm going to put water in there. Where you feel like nothing good could grow, I'm going to launch something. I'm going to grow something in your marriage. I am going to do it. Here's the kicker, right? This thing, the key one's over here. It's not you're going to do it. God's going to do it. God's got something to do. Our only thing is will we perceive it. The most encouraging thing God would want to say to some of you today, especially in the arena of marriage, is he has got a way for you in the wilderness, and he's got water where you feel parched and dehydrated and hopeless. There is a way that only God can make. He got unlimited creativity to make that happen. That's what God is inviting us into. Say, could we start with that? Before we talk about principles, and actually could we see God? Before we talk about how do I apply it and how do I live it and what truth do I need to understand, could we just say, man, this is the motive of God. He's doing a good thing in us and he's got a new and creative thing in us. But what's God trying to do with that? So he's doing something new and creative, but what's the end goal? Like what's the way in which God often does it? Well, again, God's going to try and do it in a way where he can kind of add to what we know and add to what we live. He wants to shrink that gap. He wants to be fueling both of them in a way that shrinks the gap between them so we could be knowing who he is and living who he is at the same time. In fact, he talks about that a little bit. It's the story of all throughout the scripture. This is a story over and over again. And maybe in the most crystallized way, Jesus talks about it in John chapter 8. John, recording Jesus' life, he records this statement from him in John chapter 8. He says, hey, if you'll just hold on, like if you'll just grab a hold of my teaching and actually live it, I mean, take hold of it, like carry it around, like live this thing out. Don't just take hold of my teaching, take hold of my teaching. Like if you would grab a hold of my teaching and live this thing, then that's when you'll know you're my disciple. That's when your life will actually start to look like my life. All the knowledge in the world gained, but not lived, you don't look like my disciple. I want to give you knowledge and living. I want to help you know enough to live fully like me. That's when you'll be my disciple. And you'll kind of know you're my disciple because people around you will start looking like my disciples. Because your life will be influenced on them. Like from the beginning of time, God's been a multiplier of things, right? He says, then what's happening in your life is you will be knowing the truth. You'll have this experience of knowing more and more of who I am and my truth and truth about yourself. And that truth that you're knowing will not just be a truth that you know, it will be a truth that you know in a way that sets you free. It will set you free to experience more. It will set you free to heal. It will set you free to regroup. It will set you free to dream something. It will set you free. Like Jesus says, look, in your marriage, I want to just help you know the truth about you and about your spouse and about me as the center of your marriage. And that truth is going to set you free. I want you to know more truth so you can be more free. I want you to know more about who I am and who you are as a husband and wife and individuals so that you can live even more free than you do today. Jesus says, I want to just put those things together. I want to eliminate the gap. I want what you know and what you live to just be perfectly in sync. Because that's how you live as my disciple, and that's what I created you to be. That's what I want you to live. So listen, your marriage, like wherever your marriage is, like if it's a 0 on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, best ever, whatever it is, Jesus would just say this day, look, let me help you know some truth about you and about your spouse, and let me use that truth to set you more free, to help you live more of what I have for you. And again, it applies to every single relationship. It applies to your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your parents, your relationship as an adult with your parents, colleagues, bosses, right? The whole thing. But inside of marriage, what's Jesus actually doing? How could we actually know some truth so that we could live some more freedom? So we could be free to dream bigger, so we could be free to hope against whatever that is. Well, I want to share with you a tool today, and you might be familiar with it. It's a tool actually that when Journey first started, we used it in some leadership environments like 13 years ago now, and we really should have stayed with it because it was a really helpful tool. We had a lot of fun with it, and we should have just kept using it. Just kind of drifted away from it. It's a tool. Some of you have probably heard of it. It's called the Johari Window. And it was actually created in 1955 by a couple of psychologists. And every time we talk about something like this, I always just kind of chuckle at this thing because a lot of times when you read something that's true, like really true, it just rings true to you, like about psychology or mental health or leadership or business or whatever, and you find this really good truth, and it's written by people like who aren't Jesus followers, not claiming to be Jesus followers or anything else. I often chuckle because they're writing more biblical principles than they realize. They're writing more about the principles that Jesus actually put into the world than they actually know in the moment, right? Because why? Because Jesus gave us truth, and truth works. Truth has a life, right? And so that's kind of part of this Johari window. It's like, oh, yeah, like you can see the work of Jesus in these parts of our life. So Johari window is really it's a series of windows that give us a glimpse. It's like different panes in the window that give us a glimpse into who we are as individuals and as couples, or even in friendship dynamics or team dynamics. And so we'll just play these things out. Let me just walk them out with you today for a couple of minutes. Here's the first one. The first window in this whole Johari window experience is just the open window. It's just the big open window. It's like this is where, this is all the things that you know about you and all the people around you know about you. Nobody's guessing. Nobody's got to inform anybody. Okay, it's all your good things. It's people who know your sense of humor. It's people who know your skills. It's also all the little like weird annoyances and idiosyncrasies we all have, but they're the ones that we know and everybody else knows. And either we just don't want to change them or people have learned to live with them, right? It's in the open, right? There's no guessing about these things, right? And this is kind of a fun place to live because like, okay, this is who I am and I'm not holding anything back. And the people around me, they're good with this part of me. They understand who I am. That's great. It's a great place to live. You've got that as a person. You've got that in every relationship that you're in. Now there's a second window, though. It's called the hidden self. And the hidden self is a little bit different. The hidden self is what you know about you, but nobody else knows about you. And the hidden self is where things get a little more tricky. It's where things get a little more sticky and vulnerable. The hidden self is where we bump into things that we could just broad sweeping stroke call our secrets. It's the thing about us, or it's the thing about even us as a husband and wife that nobody else knows. We've just kind of held that back. We've pulled it in. We've guarded that, and we're working hard to guard it. Like we've got a secret we're trying to hide. And here's the risk, though. Like you are only, and I am only as strong as our secrets. We can feel like we got a secret and like we're spending 5% of ourselves trying to hide it and protect it, but it always actually is a much more significant part of ourselves. Our emotional energy, mental energy, trying to guard whatever that secret is. Sometimes this hidden window is our motives. We know our motives sometimes, and there are just some motives. We've gotten good enough at it that some other people don't know our motives. And we may not even like the motive, but we've gotten good enough at it. Or pretending. We've gotten good at pretending. Like, wherever I'm at, like, what does that person need? And I'm going to do my best to be that. What does that group need? And I'm going to do my best to be that. This isn't really me, but I'm just being that because I think that's what they need. Or I think that's how they'll accept me. Like I'm going to be that because I think that's how they'll accept me. And so we spend all this energy like pretending, trying to figure it out. Here's the thing about this hidden self with your life or your most significant relationships. Here's the thing. It's remarkably isolating. And we've known isolation is risky for forever, right? And in COVID, we've seen both the risk of that and the damage of isolation. But look, it's always been true. This is where, regardless of season of life, regardless of COVID and quarantines or no COVIDs and quarantines, when we got a hidden self, there's a slice of our life that is isolated. That's why we can be in huge groups and in huge rooms of people and on big teams and have lots of friends and still feel a little isolated because of this hidden self thing. So the question when we talk about something like a hidden self is what would we do about it? I mean, the real question's got to be, would we risk actually sharing? Would we risk sharing? Would we risk just saying, look, this is my secret, or this is our secret. This is the thing that weighs us down. This is the thing that I know and I don't like about myself. This is the thing I like about myself and I wish somehow I could express it better. Right? Would we be willing to risk sharing? Now, let's be clear. We don't risk sharing like on social media this afternoon or at the next family reunion with 100 of our closest friends that we see once a year, right? That's not the environment. That's not what we're attempting to do. That's not right. But who's the one person or who's the one couple that just say, man, I'm going to risk it. And we just got to be honest. It's a risk. Even with the people who love us most. I remember several years ago being in a truck with a friend, and we had stopped at this one point in this place we were going, and he had just been begging me like, are you being vulnerable with me, being vulnerable with me, being vulnerable with me? And I kind of knew what was coming, right? So I just started getting really vulnerable, right? I'm like, he thinks he wants, so I just started getting really vulnerable, right? And I looked back across him, he was driving, and I looked back over in the driver's seat, and he's just, I'm like, what you thought you wanted wasn't really what you wanted, right? I mean, you don't know what to do with it now, right? I mean, it doesn't always go perfectly. But here's the thing, would we risk sharing instead of living with the risk of hiding? We're choosing risk, friends. And sharing might work. Hiding is going to kill us. As individuals, as couples, would we risk sharing? Who's in your life that you would take the risk with? Who's in your life that you would gamble with? Maybe you just start small and you just start testing it a little bit. Like, okay, I'm going to share a little bit more. I'm going to share a little bit more. And if you're married, you got to ask, who outside of just your spouse would you share with? Who outside would you risk that with? So there's certainly this hidden window, and there's some risk there. But then the third window, or kind of the third pane in the whole window, the third window is just this thing of what are we just blinded to? Like, there is a blind self. There are things about your life and my life that we don't know and the people around us know, which is remarkably uncomfortable to think about, yes? I mean, this is like the big life example of like spinach in your teeth. And it's nobody telling you, right? It's just there and nobody's telling you, talking to you like you're the best friend or whatever, right? It's just, If any of you, like some of you may not be old enough to fully embrace this or remember this, but will you just raise your hand, even maybe online, remember the show American Idol? Y'all remember that? Are you old enough to? Okay, all right, thank you, make you feel a little bit younger, right? So look, American Idol is a case study in people living the blind self. I'm going to this audition because I'm God's gift to the vocal world. Right? And they show up and like neither nobody's told them, or right? And then the judges have to tell them, all right? I mean, that'd be like me going to American Idol. Like, I'm going to change. Like, no, man, there are some things that you just need to know about yourself. There are some things I need to know about myself. There are some things you need to know about your marriage that you actually don't know. And even as husband and wife, you don't know. Sometimes it's things like tone. Sometimes we are blind. We are blind to the power of our tone. We're blind to the power of our tone with our spouse and our relationship. We're blind in the power of the tone that we set as a couple and the people around us and the words that we use. We can be blind. Sometimes we're blind to our own motive. Sometimes we hide the motive. Sometimes we don't even really know the motive. Sometimes we don't even know why we do what we do. Because the people around us, they know enough of our hurt story. They know enough of our pain. They know enough of our ambition. They know enough of our selfishness. That sometimes they've got a better handle on the motive than we do. And we just need the gift of some help in understanding that. Right? There are things that people around you, they know. And you just don't know why you hesitate. What some of your tendencies are. Why you go for certain things and not other things. Why as a couple, you end up in the same cycle over and over and over again? There's a blind self that all of us deal with in some way. Here's how we know this is true. Because left to our own devices, the prophet Jeremiah had it right, and God speaking right through him. Prophet Jeremiah wrote these words, and this is true about you and me, left to our own devices. That your heart and my heart, it is deceitful, man, above all things. The heart's deceitful, and that's not just deceives everybody else. Our heart can deceive us. That's why we say all the time, measure feelings, but don't bank your whole life on your feelings, friends. Right? You can't bank your whole life on that, right? Because the heart left to its own devices is deceitful. It's why we need Jesus. It's why we need the people Jesus gave in our life. It's why we need his Spirit, right? Because on its own, it's beyond cure. Left to our own devices, our heart is beyond cure. We can't even understand our own heart. So what do we do with that? If that's true about you and me, what do we do? And how do we make a move to kind of get out of this blind self and to eliminate some of this in our life? As much as before we just got to risk some sharing here, we got to risk some listening. Would we actually just risk being a really good listener? Would we risk putting ourselves in a posture where we just say, okay, look, I'm going to do my best to sit across the table from somebody, and I'm going to hear from them. I'm genuinely going to listen. And it might hurt. It might sting. Right? But if we get across the table from the right person, then we know we can kind of trust that pain. The writer of Proverbs said it really well. I want to show you this proverb in two different translations. First one is simply this, that wounds made by a friend, those are intended to help. The people who love us most and the people we trust most, when we get a wound from them, in an intentional, meaningful conversation, those wounds are actually intended to help. But an enemy's kisses they're too much to bear. That they don't actually work in our favor. Let me show you one more translation and kind of catch the end of this. Wounds from a friend can be trusted again. But an enemy multiplies kisses. Can I help you know who some of our enemies are? Look, regardless of how old you are, what season of your life in, your enemy is not always the person who's saying bad and evil things about you. Sometimes your enemy is the person who is constantly flattering you. Sometimes the enemy is the person who will only say what you think, because that just starts multiplying pain, man. It starts fueling you living in a spot you don't have to live anymore. It starts fueling you living more stuck. It starts fueling a plateau in your life, right? What we need is friends who in love would actually speak a truth to us. Right? Same is true inside of our marriages, right? We need people around us, couples around us or friends around us who are willing to have honest, heartfelt, loving conversations, and we can trust their motive about our life, not just their willingness to keep adding on flattery, keep affirming what we're saying. Here's the thing, listening is not just the hunt to go find people who agree with us or people who will condone or confirm what we think or are doing. Listening is actually an exercise in discovery. Listening, it's an exercise in discovery to try and say, look, what can I learn about myself? What can I learn about our marriage? What could we learn together if we would actually risk listening? Let me just show you this window again. If we go back to this thing, you can kind of see there's this little catch in here where we can get kind of caught in this third window where we say, look, I'm hidden in this thing. I can't see it. I can't see it. I'm blind to what it is that I need to actually see. And we get caught there and we can actually, look, we know some people know stuff about us, but we can reach a point where we don't actually want to know what they know that we don't know. Right? We don't want to know. We don't want to benefit from what it is they might know. And one of the things that we are great at as a culture right now is not being teachable. Right? We are not a teachable culture right now. And unfortunately, to be quite candid, unfortunately, that is just rushing its way inside the church at large too. If we're not careful, we're going to get ourselves in this spot where we're not teachable, even from Jesus, because Jesus has given us people to help us, and we're not teachable. We're withholding parts of our life. We think we know the best way. We think we've got all the answers. We're embarrassed or ashamed to not have all the answers. And so we get caught here and we start to not want to know. And we just withhold that part of our life. Say, it doesn't matter what I don't know. That part of me is off limits. And if it means it becomes the barrier to my growth, then it becomes the barrier to my growth. If it means our relationship can't grow, then our relationship can't grow. But you just got to know something. There's actually more at stake than that. There's actually more at stake than just not growing. There's a guy named Gary Thomas who's written a whole bunch about relationships and relationships with humans and relationship between humanity and God as well. And he actually quotes a guy who wrote a book called The Three Battlefields. And I love this quote. Just look at this for a second. Look at the first sentence. Satan, our arch enemy, dines on what we withhold from God. The things that we are withholding, the things that we will not be teachable in, the things that we will not make ourselves available in. Look, Satan can be an absolute glutton in those arenas of our lives. The thing that we will not be teachable in, the thing that we will not humble ourselves in, the place when we won't even take the posture of teachability, knowing there are probably things about ourselves that we do not see, man, Satan is having a feast in our lives there. Wreaking havoc in our lives. Look at the rest of the statement. Our issues that we fail to work on with God leave us vulnerable, and then conflict grows. Conflict grows out of the areas we fail to submit to God. Now look, conflict, even inside of marriage, conflict grows, the headbutting grows, not just when we disagree, but conflict grows internally. We start having our own conflict in our marriage or in the significant relationships in our life when we won't be yielded, when we won't be humble and teachable. We have our own conflict because we start to realize how many of our expectations aren't met and how things aren't going our way and all the things that we wish we had and all the ways that we think we're right and all the ways that we think our spouse is wrong. I mean, we start experiencing the internal conflict way before the external conflict becomes evident. And it happens because we're holding things back. We won't put ourselves in this place to say, you know what, one of the greatest gifts God has given me is this thing that he's doing a good work in me, which must mean there are things in me still to grow. I don't have to have the pressure of always having the answer and always being right and being an expert and I'm going to take a posture of humility in this. So the question would be, I mean, really, would we risk listening? Would we risk listening? There's a fourth and final reality to this window. It's just real simply this thing, the unknown self or the unknown part of a relationship. It's what you don't know and it's what the people around you don't know. There's things about your life. There's things about your key relationship that no matter how hard you try, you just don't know. And you're not going to know on your own. And the closest people to you right now, they don't know. It's just part of it. And the only way to kind of push through that and to navigate our way out of that is somehow we got to do some discovery together, but we're going to have to risk getting help. We're going to have to risk getting outside of just the limited friendship box or just the inner circle of people. We're going to have to risk getting some help somewhere. It's part of why we make counseling normal around here, just enough to say, look, we all have this. We all have this need to risk getting help because we all have some unknown self. One of the things that I've often grieved most around marriages, just over the last couple of decades, is when you watch a marriage struggle, and you know when if something doesn't turn, this thing is not going to recover. And there'll be this conversation somewhere along where we're just, will you get help? Will you get help? I mean, will you get real help? Will you get help? And somebody will just say back to me, help, it's no good. There's no need to get help. We've asked all the questions. I don't know what questions you asked. I just know I can promise you haven't asked them all. And that becomes this barrier. Because we won't get up. We won't discover the unknown self. We won't discover the unknown piece of help. We won't discover it when it might actually save us. And it might actually help us not just be good and okay, but give us a chance at great. And it may not even limit us at great. It might help us experience greater than great. It's probably a decade ago now. Erica and I, we had been back with the girls in Michigan for a couple of years. And we literally, we were kind of hurtled into a relational crisis that quite candidly really threatened our marriage and our family. And it was we were kind of hurtled into it by somebody very close to us, and it surprised us, and we didn't see it coming, and honestly, we didn't know what to do with it. But it had this real potential to be a really significant divide between me and Erica. And the only good news initially was that we weren't willing to let that happen. We didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know how to do it. We didn't even know fully what we were up against. But we just, we just got to agree we're on the same team. Okay? And we risked sharing with some people around us and tried to listen and to risk listening. Like, okay, what's about us, and what do I need to see, and what does she need to see, and what does this the other person need? Could you just help us? And we tried to risk listening. But there were just unknown factors we weren't getting to. And so we found our way to a counselor. And I remember we were in that counselor's office, and I still kind of see where we were sitting in these two chairs, and our counselor just across the room a little bit, and we're just unloading. Like, we're just unloading really what's a random put together story, because we don't even fully understand it, right? We just know if we don't get some help, we're in trouble. And so we're just unloading this thing, and the counselor's just sitting there and occasionally jotting a note, and we're just listening. And probably after 12, 15 minutes of just literally verbal throw up, right, of just us and our pain and our problem, right? There's just a little bit of a pause, and the counselor looks back at us and it says, hey, do you ever think that this isn't your problem? This isn't even what you're dealing with you and this person? But the problem's actually this. And in the moment, listen, in the moment, that in some ways probably saved us. And in the moment, it added really intense grief to our life, because that was the thing we never wanted to see, and we were never going to see it on our own. And we probably would have made it, but I'm just telling you right now, we're better because of that. We're better because of that, literally that session. Our family's better. Our girls are better because of that session. We just needed a way to get to an unknown. And the people closest to us weren't going to see it. And that's why sometimes we need a counselor, people God has wired to think like that and to see situations differently and is trained to think about it and process it and ask the right questions. And what we didn't know in the moment, we didn't have this vocabulary, but we were living with some resolve. We were just saying, look, we're going to fight for this. We're going to figure out what this is to make it so we can thrive. We're going to have some resolve on this thing. Because here's what's true. Here's what's always true, is that even right now, God is doing a brand new thing in you. It's new and it's good and it's creative. He's doing it in you and he's doing it in your marriage. Your part, my part, our part is to resolve to know it and live it. God, it may not feel like it. Hear me on this. It may not feel like it. But God is doing a good thing in you, in your marriage. He's doing a good thing in you in the relationship that feels most fractured or most vulnerable. And we can resolve to know it and live it, to shrink the gap. Here's the question. Let me give you 4 questions to know what to do with this thing. Let me just leave you with these. They're not questions you're going to answer in 2 minutes. Just ponder on them over the week. Here's the thing. What do you really want? Like right now, wherever your marriage is, or put it in the context of a different relationship, but what do you really want? What do you dream about in the future? What do you want in your marriage? What do you really want? You might really be at a point where you're saying, I just want to be able to take a breath. I just want to be able to know one step forward. You might be at a point where you're thinking, man, it's so great. If you're telling me there's better, I want better. It's so good, but come on, if it could be, where are you and what do you really want? And who are you going to share with? To try and get the hidden things out of the way and remove those kind of barriers, who are you going to share with? Who are you going to listen to? To try and help yourself see some of the barriers. Who are you going to listen to? And where are you going to go? Where are you going to go get help? Where are you going to go to get somebody who may be outside of your inner circle can walk this out with you? Again, it's why we try and make counseling really normal around here. And all of our staff goes to counseling. We say it all the time. And if you go to our website on the resources page, there's a list of counselors that we refer people to. And maybe your step is before the end of the day, you need to like leave a message at some counseling agency. Just say, look, we're going to get some help. Maybe you just need to shoot us an email at the church and say, look, I don't even know what I need, but I want to get some help. And we've got some couples who've walked a lot of life together, who are just willing to sit with other couples and listen and be encouragers and be nudgers in good directions. And maybe that'd be a gift to you. Maybe to just be part of what Jesus would use to help get one step forward. Listen, God's doing a new and a good thing in you and in your marriage and in your key relationships. Our thing is just to resolve to do whatever it takes. Share, listen, and get help at whatever level it takes so we could know it and we could live it. Let me pray for you for a minute. Jesus, thanks that the part of your nature has always been, you're always doing a new thing. I mean, you created us out of goodness. I mean, like that we started with your goodness in our direction. Paul wrote in Ephesians, the New Testament, that even the power of your resurrection is good in our direction, on our behalf and towards us. We're so grateful for that. I mean, that you're always making a good move in us. I thank you that your creativity is limitless in how you want to heal and maybe rebuild something and reconnect a relationship, but also how you want to take it from flourishing to beyond flourishing. I thank you that you have unlimited resources for that. So Jesus, for every single one of us, whether it is in our marriage or in an engagement relationship or maybe a dating relationship that feels really serious or maybe some other relationship, whatever it is, Jesus, would you give us the courage to just make a move? Would you give us the courage to share or to listen or to get some help? Thanks for your nudging. Again, thanks for your goodness. Thanks that you are doing a new thing, even in this moment, in us. We love you for it's part of what draws us to you. So we give ourselves to you. We say yes to you. In Jesus' name, amen.